Bob Goldman's life has been filled with firsts. He was the firstborn son of Arnold and Alice Goldman. He was the first in the family to become a physician and earn his PhD. Bob was also first in the Goldman family to write a book. His first book, Death in the Locker Room, Steroids in Sports, became a bestseller. He wrote it when he was still in med school. It was the first of over 40 books that Dr. Goldman has written to date. He also developed the first drug testing protocols for Ben and Joe Weider in the sport of bodybuilding. Dr. Bob established the first ever personal trainer certification program, which literally created the personal trainer industry. He was among the first to pioneer research in the area of brain resuscitation and organ preservation. His companies have registered over 150 patents in this field. In 1992, Dr. Bob co-founded the first anti-aging medical society, which coined the phrase anti-aging and gave birth to the entire anti-aging marketplace. A marketplace today that is valued at over $180 billion globally. Dr. Bob's remarkable series of firsts actually started when he was a teenager. He was a 4-sport athlete in high school, including football and wrestling, and set his first world strength record when he was just 14 years old. He would go on to set 20 world strength records, all firsts, including world records for consecutive handstand push-ups, sit-ups, and one-arm push-ups. Dr. Goldman is a black belt in karate and a Chinese weapons expert. He was an all-college athlete in 4 sports, a 3-time winner of the John F. Kennedy Physical Fitness Award, and was voted Athlete of the Year. And it all started on the first day of elementary school in the projects of Brooklyn, New York, where Bob grew up with his 2 younger brothers.
The first day in elementary school, they were doing pull-ups. I didn't even know what a pull-up was. And I grabbed the pull-up bar and I broke the school record the first time I touched the pull-up bar. And then I said, wow, this is something that I'm kind of good at. So then even at the age of 11 or 12 years old, I started training. And at that time, Jack LaLanne was on TV. I was just a kid. I used to watch Jack on TV, and he was a real initial inspiration to want to do things that he was able to do. So I would then look at the records in every school from elementary school on and go to break every calisthenic and fitness and endurance record in each of those schools. I set my first world record when I was 14 years of age. I was actually in my gym at school, and I was doing sit-ups, and I just kept going and going. And I was just doing 1,000 after 1,000, and when I finished, I found that, hey, wow, you did more than is in the Guinness Book of World Records. And so I went through that process of submitting and going for world records through Guinness World Book. At that time, world records in sit-ups were done straight leg, where your legs would be straight out in front of you. You go into the zone, because if you're doing sit-ups for 12, 13, 14 hours, you need to put yourself in a kind of trance in order to keep going, because there's no break, and you have to even drink fluid while you're going up and down, sort of like long distance or super distance runners. The sit-up record, I could basically just keep going and going, so I'd sort of pick a number I liked. So I liked an even number of 13,500. So the record at that time was 10,000, so I just kept going till I hit an even number. I could have kept going. I could have done 14,000 or probably 15,000. But I felt that I had beat the previous record by 3,500 sit-ups, so I figured that was okay. With the handstand push-up record, it's a little bit different. When you're doing handstand push-ups, you can only stay inverted for a certain amount of time because the blood is rushing to your head and you get really dizzy, and it's very difficult. Also, there's a lot of stress and strain, and when you hit the ground, you have to perfectly lock in, because you know you can only be inverted for a certain period of time. After a few minutes, you're going to start to get woozy. So it's not even a strength matter at that point, it's a stability matter. You can't stay inverted for that long because you're just going to pass out. And generally that's what happens at the end. You literally almost pass out.
He was always just really driven to do the sets and reach the goals, because a lot of those goals were self-imposed. Didn't really come from the family. It was pie in the sky, like we didn't believe it could happen and didn't think that he would be so driven to make it happen. But he was a maniac. Every spare moment, he's banging out another set.
The world record that was probably the one that was the most contested was a handstand push-up record. In order to do handstand push-up records as they were officially accepted, and I had to do them, is freestanding. You go down, there's no wall, no breaks, and you have to touch nose to the floor and hands in full extension. Otherwise, it didn't count as one repetition. So it's very strict. So you have a gymnastic official and an official counter. So you have to do these things properly or the rep is not counted. First time I did 48, next time I did 171, next time I did more and more. So at the end I did 361 consecutive handstand push-ups. What would be interesting is sometimes I would break the world record and somebody else somewhere else in the world would set another world record beating me, and in the same year I'd have to go back and try and beat that person again. So there was one year where I broke it, had somebody else break mine, had to go back and break it again, got broken again, and went back again to set it again. So I was able to successfully break it and get listed in Guinness Book of World Records a number of times. But when you're competing against the whole planet, against everyone in the world, a lot can happen in the space of 12 months. As a teenager, I applied for a job at Jack Lane Health Club. I just set a bunch of world records at that time, so I got a job as an instructor. Realized at that time there were no certified personal fitness trainers. There wasn't even really a training program for the people that worked in the gym. You just sort of would hand the people the weights or clean the mirrors or vacuum the rugs. That was your job. And at that point in time, since I was setting world records, the owners of the club chains decided to use me as sort of the poster boy on the promotion materials and ads in the New York Daily News and the New York Post and in these different mailers that were going out. In one envelope, they sent this out to 200,000 people. I mean, I had people stopping me on the street. I was sort of like the poster boy for the health clubs. When I was a teenager in the gyms, and this was a different world back then. Steroids were not illegal. There was no banned. They didn't even have drug tests for anabolic steroids at that time period. And I noticed that we would see needles and bottles and pills and things left around the gym, but we really didn't think much about it. And then I had someone who was teaching me how to lift weights who ended up having not only serious health problems that died, and I was concerned that the anabolic steroids may have played a role in that. So I began my research independently, and out of these many hours I spent in the libraries pulling old articles came my first book, which was called Death in the Locker Room, Steroids in Sport, which went on to be the #1 first major expose on the use of drug use in sports. And it was before medical school. I was still in college at the time. At that same point in time, I ended up meeting Dr. John Ziegler. Dr. Ziegler was the American team physician in the 1950s who was with the U.S. Olympic team, the weightlifting team, and he went to the Eastern Bloc nations for a world championship, and he noticed how the female athletes were very masculinized and the male athletes were much stronger. The East Germans and the Russians and so on were very powerful athletes, and they were all of a sudden where our American athletes always used to win all the records, used to beat everybody. The time of Paul Anderson, when our athletes were just unparalleled in the world, and all of a sudden that thing just flipped like almost overnight. So the Russian team physician confided in him that they're trying these new hormone drugs, these testosterone drugs on their athletes, on their male and female athletes, and back then Dr. Ziegler said, wow, they're going to use this as a weapon, using sport as a weapon against the free world, against America. So he came back to the US in the 1950s, worked with Ciba Geiger Pharmaceuticals to come up with the first, what we call gold standard in anabolic steroids, methandrostenolone, commonly known as Dianabol. So the steroid epidemic in sport was born. And he wished that he could put the genie back in the bottle, but of course he couldn't. And I ended up becoming his protege student, studying under him the last years of his life. And Death in the Locker Room came out 1 week prior to him passing away, and I dedicated the book to him. Years later, I ended up doing a report on anabolic steroids, which I submitted to the Sport Federation to be published. And the medical committee at that time said that this was a report based on fantasy and not properly scientifically supported, even though it had almost 300 medical references associated with it. So they prevented this from being published. And Ben Weider, who started the International Federation of Bodybuilders, felt bad that it wasn't getting published, but he said, one day we'll publish this together. Well, kind of ironically, several years later, I ended up becoming chairman of the IFBB Medical Committee, and replacing all these other people. The report ended up getting published and was at that time the most popular report in the 50-year history of the Federation, and was translated into 36 languages. And then I worked with the Federation to initiate the very first drug testing protocols ever held in the history of bodybuilding back in the 1980s. So I sort of got entered into yet another whole world where we go from sport and now into the world of drug testing and dope control and education. Shortly after that time period in the 1980s, there was so many equipment companies popping up. Fitness equipment, home fitness equipment was becoming very popular, but there was no objective review of what this equipment was, how it should work, what was safe. So I started a project called the High Technology Fitness Research Institute. And we sort of became like the UL lab of fitness equipment. So I was intimately involved over the years with many of the things that we see around us today in the gyms. So this led to another book called the E Factor, the Ergogenic Factor, covering every category of fitness equipment: rowing machines, treadmills, multi-station devices, every device you can imagine, and going through in detail the positive and negatives, again, bringing into the public arena the things that are good for you and the things you need to exercise a bit of caution with. In the late 1980s, and I had worked in the health clubs for years, there were no certified personal trainers. And so I wrote the first exam, what was considered the first certification for personal fitness trainers back in the late 1980s. And formed with myself and Dr. Ron Klatz, we formed NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, which today has gone on to be one of the top certifications, sort of a gold standard certification for personal fitness trainers, because there were no certified personal trainers or a CPT. That was something I had trademarked. And then, of course, within just a year of doing the very first certification ever held for personal trainers, over 270 other groups came out of the woodwork to form their own certification. So when you start something that's new and interesting, you literally birth an whole industry, and that's what happened. Working with Dr. Ronald Klatz, we were very concerned about what we would see in emergency medicine. We always see people doing CPR, and as doctors, we're all trained in CPR. What we found is that 95% of people died whether you did CPR or not. So we actually developed and did the first whole array of patents in brain resuscitation, where we knew if we keep the brain alive long enough, the heart can hang around for 20, 30 minutes. The brain, we only had 5 or 6 minutes. So if we could chill down the temperature of the brain, or infuse different chemicals in, or preserve the brain, or do some type of brain resuscitation technique, we could keep the brain alive long enough to get them to the emergency care facility. So we wrote the whole array of original patents in brain resuscitation technologies. And then over time, these things became part of the mainstream medicine with brain cooling and so on. We also knew about preserving organs, that if we could chill down the organs, we could preserve them longer so they can then be transplanted. At one time, we were overseeing a patent portfolio of over 150 patents in the areas of brain trauma, emergency medicine, blood products, and so on. So we were very aggressive in taking that technology and saying, how can we turn it into something that will really save lives? Today, the organ resuscitation and rejuvenation technologies that we've developed are now saving tens of thousands of lives around the world, because we are now able to take organs and reanimate them so they can be transplanted to people. We flew 12 doctors to Chicago, all specialists in different areas of medicine, and we said, you know, we have to change. We have to develop medicine for the future. We have to develop a whole new paradigm of medicine. So we developed the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, actually came up with the term anti-aging, which is now used around the world. And so anti-aging medicine was born with just 12 doctors, and today has evolved into the largest preventive medical society in the world, with over 22,000 physicians and scientists as members in over 110 countries. We do conferences globally, and we train tens of thousands of doctors a year. In fact, we've trained over 100,000 physicians and scientists on site at these conferences. And we were getting governments, ministries of health, ministries of sport to be involved. And again, going back to the bodybuilding industry, that gave the entrees, because during those years of bodybuilding, I got to meet the ministers of sport, the ministers of health, and prime ministers and heads of government in these nations all over the world. So I was then able to use those contacts for our medical federation to help us grow globally so quickly at the highest level. And that's what's allowed us to expand and to grow into the organization we are today.
Dr. Goldman has served as a senior fellow at Tufts University, as an affiliate at Harvard University, and visiting professorship at medical universities around the world. He has authored and overseen cooperative research agreement development programs in conjunction with such prominent institutions as the American Red Cross, the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, the Department of Defense, and the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Dr. Goldman is the recipient of the Gold Medal for Science, the Grand Prize for Medicine, the Humanitarian Award, and the Business Development Award. Dr. Goldman was awarded the Healthy American Fitness Leader Award from the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports and U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Goldman received honors from ministers of sports and government health officials of numerous nations. In 2001, Excellency Juan Antonio Samaranch awarded Dr. Goldman the International Olympic Committee Tribute Diploma for contributions to the development of sport and Olympism. Dr. Goldman also served as chairman of Junior Olympics and Master Olympic Sports Medicine Commissions, overseeing millions of American athletes. Dr. Goldman is also chairman of the International Medical Commission, overseeing sports and medicine committees in over 184 nations. He has served as a special advisor to the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports, and inducted into the World Hall of Fame of Physical Fitness and the National Fitness Hall of Fame.
Thank you very much. You have been a great partner, and without you we would not have been able to do the kind of things in bodybuilding that we have done, advancing the science and helping us in every step of the way. And we have had a great relationship over the years with you, and you just have been a jewel. I mean, it's so great when you have a friend by your side, and no matter what you're into, you can always call you.
We always say yes, sir. Whatever it is, yes. My goals now are to try and change the way the aging process takes place. I think that people should be healthy and strong well into 100 to 120 years of age. We're really on the brink of some very exciting things with the advent of stem cells, nanotechnology, genetic engineering, gene therapy. We're in the most amazing time in medicine and life that this planet has ever seen. And that's what's really exciting, to live in a time period when the impossible is truly possible.
In a lifetime filled with firsts in both athletics and business, Dr. Goldman will be the first to tell you that health is his most valuable asset.
Everyone needs to do some type of physical activity every day, no matter what their age. Your health is your wealth. Your health is the most valuable possession you will ever own.
you